Firstly, I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's The Big Debate on the future of Labour's youth sections. We've got a brilliant panel for this evening's discussion. Firstly, a plug for some of the other work that the Young Fabians are doing. I think this is event number 76 of our Zoom event series. We've been doing between 5 and 8 events every week on Zoom ever since the lockdown started, and they seem to have gone well, with events with up to 23 shadow ministers so far, which has been, or shadow members of the shadow team, which has been great. We've now got 9 active policy projects underway as well, one into ethical artificial intelligence, international environmental accountability, redefining economic progress, happiness versus GDP, education policy development, the accessibility of politics, cultural policy within the Labour Party, an alternative health manifesto, a bit on the effectiveness of metro mayors, and an analysis of Scottish Labour and their policy platform ahead of the 2021 elections, and plenty more coming with the launch of regional events around the country, 10 policy networks, and a BAME advocacy group. So we really have branched out and become incredibly active this year, which is great to see. And as one of Labour's youth sections, we decided that it was good for us to host a debate on the future of the Labour's youth sections in the round. I think that ever since I've been involved in the youth sections of the Labour Party, that it is really, it's been in need of reform for as long as I can remember. And that's what this debate is going to be about. It's broadcast on Facebook, it will go up on YouTube, and we've got people joining us this evening as participants. Thank you all very much for joining us. I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves in order: Eli, Abdi, Ella and Danny. So Eli, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, hi, my name is Eloise or Eli Harris. I'm 20 years old. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the chair of Queen Mary University of London Labour Society.
Abdi.
Hi everyone, my name is Abdi Duale. I'm a former Young Fabian Exec member and a former Labour organiser in Canterbury and in Central Acton.
Hi, I'm Ella. My pronouns are also she, her. I am the former National Director of the Jewish Labour Movement, where I'm currently their Equalities Officer, and a former President of the Union of Jewish Students.
And hi, I'm Danny Fider. I'm 30, so I'm straddling the very edge of what can be considered young in the Labour Party. I've been heavily involved in Labour students and in Young Labour, and currently don't hold any positions, thank God.
Yeah, that is a sign of someone who's been involved in the Young Labour movement, that is. Brilliant. And as was put out on the email on communications, the first question, the way this is going to be structured is I'll ask the first question. Each of our panellists will have 2.5 minutes to open the debate with their arguments. The first question centres on the why. Then we'll go into a debate with up to 2 minutes comments from each panel member, which can be directed at the panel as a whole or at individuals. And then after a period of debate, we'll then go into the second question, which is focused on the how. So the structure of it as it stands, and how to reform. We'll then go into another comments piece, and then each member of the panel will have a chance to have closing remarks. We won't be doing a poll to see who's successful or who's not, but what we will be doing is asking you, our audience, to contact us at info@youngfabians.org.uk with your ideas and your suggestions, and hopefully we can put them into article form and encourage there to be a wider conversation in other parts of the youth section about its future, and have it led by young people so that it can reflect what it needs to. So without further ado, we'll go to opening remarks on the question, and I'll read the question first, and then I have, for everyone's information, I have 4 stopwatches here. So I'm tracking everyone's time, which they're speaking. So if someone has spoken and taken up too much time, they will be cut off in no uncertain terms. So the first question: the Labour Party has had many iterations of youth sections, from Young Labour to the Labour Party, Young Socialists to the League of Labour, so the Labour League of Youth. In the modern age, though the most important question that could be asked is, what is the point of having a youth section to the Labour Party, and what should it be aimed at achieving? The first speaking order is going to go Eli, Abdi, Ella and Danny with rebuttals. Eli, the floor's on to you.
Yep. So we've seen the Labour Party's youth sections transformed from a thorn in the adult party side to one of its staunchest allies, to quote Jeremy Tranmer's writing on the subject. Despite the evidence showing time and time again that people who lead Labour's youth wings go on to hold important positions in our mother party, I believe that we still aren't taken very seriously. I mean, as far as I'm aware, Young Labour has one paid staffer who's also expected to do other jobs for the Labour Party. And I sometimes get the impression that we spend more time focused on tweets rather than organising. So to me, at least, having a functioning youth wing is not up for debate. It's an imperative for the future success of the Labour Party. So as I mentioned before, I'm 20 years old. I have like 6 years left in Young Labour. And if nothing changes in those 6 years, I'm going to be seriously worried for the future of our party. Our youth wings, they need re-energising outside of the capital. And I say this as somebody who grew up in the rural East Midlands. I mean, I remember there was a political education event in Birmingham in, I think, 2018, and that was a fantastic example of what we need to be doing. And, you know, actions from individual students, such as the Sterling 13 in support of the UCU strikes, was, in my opinion, at least, like an example of like the best of the best in our movement. And I have endless solidarity to them. So beyond churning out future MPs and people who we can rely on for free Labour whenever a general election comes around, Young Labour, it has to be so much more than what it currently is. Our youth sections should not be places where people collect positions and titles to stick into their little Twitter bios, nor should they be reliant on people who can afford to give hours of free Labour and who can pay their own expenses and afford to like live in London without
30 seconds.
Yeah, okay, so we need to be accessible, we need to be engaging, that's it.
Make sure my mic is on. Amazing. With 20 seconds to spare, Abdi, 2.5 minutes, opening remarks on question 1.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I kind of agree with Eli on a couple of those points, actually. I think we need to hone in what the point of the Labour youth sections are. And I'd argue it's supposed to be a home for young people who want to see changes in their society and in their hometowns, and joining the Labour Party in order to make that change possible. So a good example is, let's say if you're not happy with something that your local authority is doing, you know, the Labour Party should be a home for you as a young person to join, to meet like-minded people, to start campaigns, to make change in your local area. What I wouldn't argue is that I've always felt uncomfortable with the age range of Young Labour, and we'll get into that about how we can reform that. But I think we really need to hone in what's the point. And I think that's having an honest conversation with the leadership and the party structures about what the party expects from Young Labour. Is that just more troops on the ground knocking on doors and leafleting and phone banking and doing all the campaigning stuff? Or is it to empower young people to be their own voice, to make change in their own communities? And I'd argue it's the latter, and the former is something that comes along with it. So that's what I think the point of it should be, is enabling young people to be able to campaign for change in their local communities, and the party giving them that empowerment. I agree with Eli. I think the party resources isn't enough. The party has one youth officer, and there hasn't been much activity around youth sections in the party. And the NEC's recent decision to get rid of Labour students, I'd argue, was probably counterproductive to that, because actually, you know, in the run-up to a general election, we were reaching out to students, asking them to vote Labour, but on the one hand, abolishing the one representative body that they had in the party. So the party needs to reform, I think, completely its youth sections and need to rethink. It currently doesn't have a student section. despite all of the shenanigans that Labour students, for example, were still campaigning for Labour MPs and marginals in the last general election. So the point is that we empower young people, but that comes with a cost, and the party has to be willing to foot that cost. And that cost should be, making sure that we are providing an accessible and engaging platform for young people. That shouldn't be. Sorry?
10 seconds, sorry.
Sure, and what the party needs to get better at is making sure that those spaces are accessible and are friendly to all those in those spaces.
Great, apologies for that. Enthralled. Ella, take it away.
So, something that Abdi really encapsulated, which I really agree with, is my permanent irritation with the phrase future leaders. And the idea of young people being thrust upon, this is your time to develop and grow, rather than to take charge and lead. I think we're seeing a real sea change in that, in the way the media portrays youth as well. We've gone from apathetic young people who only want to play their PlayStations and Fortnite and whatever young people do. I'm aged out of Young Labour yesterday, so excuse the fact that I don't know these things or watch TikToks. To, if you look at Extinction Rebellion and some of the protest movements that have grown up in the past few years, and then being truly, really youth-led, I think we've had real difference in how people are seeing young people and how young people feel empowered within themselves to make change, what they wouldn't necessarily have maybe 10 years ago. Certainly when I started being involved in youth politics in my time at university, it was very much seen as a, oh, in 10 years time or in 30 years time, you might be able to have that platform. And being involved in, my first experience with the Labour students was when I was a Jewish student on campus, and watching them campaign and support Jewish students on campus on issues that mattered to us at the time. And I look at some of the amazing things that our youth sections have achieved over the years with actually very little support and resourcing. Miriam Mowich, the current chair of Young Labour, who is one of the most frighteningly lovely people I've ever met, and really has gone out her way to make people feel included with very little resource and budget. And I think, as Eli said, doing that all out of her own pocket, rather than being funded by the party in order to achieve these things. I look at Labour students and the work they've done on anti-Semitism training, going out to clubs and saying, we'd like you to take this up, and actually a model the party very much could have followed during some very dark years we've had in the past few years on anti-Semitism, and Labour students really actually taking a lead in that, and many of the times. So I think the idea of creating future leaders is really, really important. I think that's the space for youth sections, but also what Abdi said in terms of empowering people, young people, to make a difference now. What policies can we bring to conference? The structures within the Labour Party, or formerly Labour students and wherever they stand right now, but also Young Labour, and making sure that they're taking forward policies and being able to shape our movement. And I think that's something I'll come on to later, is taking out some of the maybe older influences on Young Labour, enabling them to be able to really become a section that enables them to thrive and flourish, and not just for the sake of creating people in 30 years time, but for creating activists and people now who can run for parliament young, who can become councillors young, and do all these amazing things that we know young people can do.
Great, that's time. And Danny, follow us up.
Yeah, so in terms of the purpose, why there should be youth wing and the purpose of it, I think you have to sort of consider that often the party leadership and the opinions of the members are often quite diametrically opposed at times. Clearly, throughout history, there's been a desire for the party to produce and encourage a youth section, sometimes backed up more by words than actual actions. But from the party's perspective, there's always a desire to bring more young people into the Labour Party, to improve the appeal of the party to young people, and obviously to improve voter share. And for the party, young members are a valuable resource in terms of campaigning activity. For the membership, while they would often agree with all those points, they often have a desire to want to be able to debate policy. They're typically more radical than their older counterparts. And what they want to be able to do is they want to be able to debate policy, but also disagree with the party when they feel it's not in the interests of their youth section. In terms of like what the purpose should be, like Young Labour and Labour students should be like no other, should be like just every other advocacy group in the Labour Party. Their purpose is to advocate for and argue for the youth of Britain, and policies that basically benefit, and to leverage their voice in the party. I think part of the problem that we've had in the past is that when the youth sections have started to talk a bit more about what policies they do or don't agree with, that's when basically they tend to butt up against the party's NEC. And we've seen obviously through, I mean, there's clearly a problem because we've seen that the youth wing of the Labour Party has been abolished by three or so times. Labour students now twice. There's this problem where there's a culture of not being able to stand young members having a disagreeing point of view. The party that I think that causes these issues. There's also always been issues that are of discontent in terms of funding. There's still that issue. That's always been funding, policy disagreements, and also autonomy is a big one. Even though, so for instance, some reforms that have just taken place for young labour groups, you still see that very integral to the formation of young labour groups are the secretaries of CLPs. And while you might think, well, you would want CLPs to support young labour groups, they do provide a structural element of control. And I think that's part of the problem. I think when we talk about how to change things, I think we've got to talk about how we can basically free up the youth wings and trust them a bit. Trust them to be able to, discuss their policy, be able to operate and organise themselves. But yeah, that's just me.
Great, thank you. Variety of times taken there. Eli, first rebuttal.
Yeah, so it's not really a rebuttal so much as following on to something that Ella brought up, which was how we get involved in direct action, how we go to protests, and we love it as young people. Like, we feel energized by it. We feel like we're having some tangible effect on something. But when we go to these protests, no matter if it's Black Lives Matter or youth climate strikes, when we come home, our immediate thought isn't, I'm going to go join the Labour Party, because there isn't really a presence there from Young Labour. We're individually quite vocal, but as a collective, I feel like we've not got a very strong and unified voice. So what are we doing to capture young people until the next general election, 2024? We've got a long time to build on. We have a fantastic base of young activists, thanks to 2015, and our membership blew up. So what are we doing to sustain this movement? What are we doing to make sure that we're ready to hand the baton to the next generation? And that's what I would like to see our next Young Labour Committee address.
Right, Abdi, something which I think Danny said is the senior section will want to be able to will want to not have a disagreement with the youth section. If the point of the youth section is to make it an access point for people to lobby for policy, do you think there is a clash between those two things?
Well, I think what I'd stress is, it's how we do the lobbying for policies. Do we do it all over? Do we do it in public, and we basically, call out our leadership being useless because they're not going to scrap Trident, or they're not going to defund the banks, or they're not going to? I mean, there are certain policies that I think I wouldn't want the leadership to take up. The last policy, Young Labour had a policy conference. I think it was 2017, and it was in Warwick. And some of the policies that came out of it, I mean, I wouldn't want a Labour government to take it up. It was stuff like, abolishing all banks, leaving NATO, even arguing against a two-state solution. I mean, it was. It wasn't. It was policy that I wouldn't want the Labour leadership to take out. So I think we need to have a discussion. I guess lobbying for policy involves having a discussion with the leadership on what those policies are, and communicating what the benefits of those policies are to young people. If they are policies that are not going to do anything for young people, then I'd quite frankly like the leadership to turn around and say we're not going to do that. And that's why I think our policies need to become practical. And address the inequalities young people are facing. Post-COVID, the job market and the employment market is going to be much more harder for young people to get into, and I want Young Labour to address those issues, which are going to be more important.
Great. Ella, making a more inclusive Young Labour, it appears that Young Labour does there is factionalism all over the Labour Party. How do you think that Young Labour or the youth sections could ever address that and try and make it an inclusive space? What do you think?
I mean, not necessarily factionalism as a concept is problematic. There will always be competing theories and ideas and things that different people want to see, right? That's not a problem. It's about how we do it and how we organise. I think clearly a lot of the issues that are coming with Labour's youth section at the moment are to do with a very complex and unnecessarily difficult structure within the Labour Party that has grown very organically over the past 120 years. You know, the difference between socialist societies and sections and affiliates, and I think, you know, the fact that any leader of the party can ban or outlaw Labour students or a young Labour section, I think, is abhorrent. I don't think anyone should have, any adult in inverted commas, should have the power or space to say, no, we no longer want the voices of young people involved in this. I think that's really difficult and really challenging. In terms of inclusivity, you know, like, over the years, I've struggled to go into many Labour spaces because I know that I walk in and I will face anti-Semitism. And that's been really hard and really challenging. And be that within some young Labour spaces or some Labour student spaces, but it's the willingness to challenge from leadership that is always important. And if that leadership isn't shown, it's about collectively organising to make sure that the leadership is challenged to show that, right? So I referenced earlier to the work the Labour students did in fighting anti-Semitism. That was hugely important for me and for looking at my younger sister on campus and what she wanted to get involved in, and was unable to do so because of what she was saying happening in Facebook groups or at meetings. And certainly some of my worst experiences have come from some of the young sections within our party. I think that's my earlier point, right? The problem that I see with the young Labour sections at the moment is about secure pathways and changing goalposts. There needs to be a you want a young 14-year-old to come in, energised and passionate about changing things. They want to say, okay, I'm going to do some stuff for you. I want to work up to a position of leadership. Within that time, a faction or someone is going to change those goalposts for them. We need secure pathways within our movements. It shouldn't be that, you know, the NEC youth space and the YL chair, which are happening on the same ballot paper, are elected in two different ways. We have to have these secure pathways that enable young people to look at it and say, I feel like I can make that change, rather than someone's going to stop me if they don't like who I am. We need to tell young people that they can achieve anything rather than change the goalposts for them halfway through an election. I think that's been really problematic in the past few years. And the more we can do to enable young people to feel confident and empowered within young movements, I think is really important.
Oh, very good, very good. Danny, apathy is a big problem in lots with young people in general. I mean, but Young Labour does tend to have lots of firebrands. With a youth section which is active, which is vocal, do you think that there is a way that spaces can be built to include a range of different views within the space, even though you've got lots of people barking at each other a lot of the time?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that perhaps people are trying to sort of bark, as you put, bark and trying to have their voices heard because they already feel like their voices are so little heard, are being marginalised or are being silenced. I mean, like, one of the things that obviously Abdi just said then was to do with hinting at being okay with party leadership essentially silencing the youth voice. Well, that's pretty much the part and parcel of the problem that the Labour Party has had for the last 100 years with its youth section. It's this desire that, I mean, I'm not saying that I agree with every single policy that the youth wings have passed when I've been a young member, but I have to accept that these are being passed by young members in a majority, whether I like it or not. I think that, yeah, so in terms of unfortunately it's a case of you either believe that the youth should have a voice and that should be their sort of right, or you don't. And what's going to happen is you're going to, if you basically try to suppress that sort of voice, you're going to basically repeat the same mistakes we've had year on year. I think part of the problem with some of these topics is also the quality of political education is obviously really, really poor. When we talk about political education, we're not actually talking about providing spaces for people to make their own minds up, but often you get various factional groups that are very keen to push their own particular narrative, and that obviously doesn't actually lend very well to these sort of discussions. I thought the comment on future leadership was quite good, and obviously I know that Labour Students has brought up. Part of my problem when I've been in Labour Students I think they did some really good things. I think the anti-Semitism training was absolutely brilliant. I was really sad to see it stop. And clubs should hopefully get access to some sort of resource like that again, because it's really, really important. But I do find that a lot of my problem was that when you get this sort of toxic nature in your youth wings, because people feel their voices being cut out, it generates toxic behaviors and toxic cultures. And I was always adamant that basically the sort of behaviors you learn in your youth wings, it will lead and it leach out to your older sections. And so it's really, really important to get the culture right in your youth sections. Otherwise, you're going to sort of almost, taint the whole party. It was unfortunate with the Labour students being disaffiliated, because the Labour Party definitely needs an organised youth student section.
Time on you, Danny. There, sorry.
Yeah.
Eli, did you want to pick it up? I mean, I couldn't agree more. In my experience, the youth section's not been the most fun thing to be part of. I think that's fair to say. But there is a point to it. There is a way. It is a pathway to getting young people involved in the party. What do you think the young youth section's done well, or what do you think some of your comments are on your experience of it?
So, I mean, not gonna lie, because I'm only 20, I don't have as much experience of the youth section as the people here, but I mean, I'm familiar with London Young Labour. In recent weeks, Lewisham Deptford Young Labour have done amazing Zoom talks on a range of topics every week. They've been so consistent and it's been fantastic. I've been to loads. It's been really good to see. But again, I like Danny highlighted, the culture is really, really off-putting. I remember the London Young Labour summer policy event thing. At one point, it just got really heated and a bit uncomfortable, I think. And I think we only debated 2 motions by the end of the day. It wasn't nice. And I think we could have done a lot better in that regard. I think there was some, and the motions passed were not, they hardly sparked debate. It was very agreeable things like racism is bad. I should hope we would all agree on that one. So I think it's really hard to come up with one solution to all of this, but there needs to be a systematic change from the bottom up. And I think the fact that we've slashed Labour students and we have a blank slate, it's a fantastic opportunity to do something completely new that we've never done before. And I really, really hope that the Labour Party lets us direct our own fate in that regard and doesn't try and steer us in whatever direction they want us to go in.
Just a follow up to Eli, there is always a balance between doorstep fodder, acts a policy voice and advocate for youth. What do you think you would want? Do you think you'd want the youth section to just focus on youth issues? I'd want it to focus on lots of different issues, and have it present at lots of different things. Do you think that there is a need, some kind of coming together? I mean, is there a need for people to sit down from different factions and have more sort of a male couple where they all just get along and say, look, let's all just chill out and all calm down? I mean, that's been my...
You cut yourself off there at the end, but I basically understood what you meant. It's quite hard to get different factions into a room willingly, but I think events like political education seminars and policy debates are a fantastic opportunity, but they have to be chaired right. Like, I think that's really important, and the more I go to these kinds of events, the more I'm noticing that like the quality of the chair really, really affects these things. And I think even a decade ago, our Labour youth wings, all we were doing was kind of like supporting the party, not really challenging them, not really speaking out about things beyond like, let's support like more access to swimming pools for 16-year-olds. But I think especially with this generation, we're so like connected, and we really want to be involved in like social justice things. Like, we should take advantage of that, and we should be more direct, we should be more loud. And yeah, no, I definitely agree that we shouldn't just focus on youth things, because everything eventually comes back to how it affects young people. So I think we have to be broad in the range of issues that we tackle. Yeah.
Great. I think that's great. Abdi, there's always a trade-off between with the senior section, that they don't want the youth section to completely disagree with them, protest and everything else. That's always going to be the case. There's always going to be that kind of disagreement. What do you know? A part of the way to do it is to build a better culture. What do you think could be some of the steps towards that?
Well, I think it's firstly addressing, for example, who we invite as panellists. Now, I'm on the London Young Labour Committee, and I remember last year, I think this was the summer conference, 2019, or it might have been 2018, I don't remember. But there were people on those panels who actively denied racism in the party and actively denied anti-Semitism. Of course, there's going to be heated debates on Twitter. I pulled out of one of the panels, I remember that summer conference, because I wasn't going to platform someone who thinks anti-Semitism party doesn't exist. So I think part of the culture is who we invite, who we platform, and who we make panelists. On Danny's point about the culture within Labour students, again, I take issue with that. I think, you know, part of the culture of Labour students was people who lost elections and then 2 minutes after were campaigning for the organisation to be abolished. So if we're going to talk about culture, I think we have to be absolutely honest with ourselves that the culture within Labour students, within Young Labour, within all of those groups hasn't been perfect on anyone's side, but we have to be honest with ourselves. I don't think we should delude ourselves. And, you know, the disaffiliation of Labour students was obviously something really sad to see, but hopefully will lead to the reform of the youth structures that we need. Now, on the point about calling out the party and how the youth section goes about that, I'd argue the youth section isn't there to call the party out in public. The youth section is there to influence the party's policy around young people. Now, part of influencing is having a mature and grown-up conversation with yourself, which is sometimes you're not going to get everything you want, and you have to accept that. And that means moving on and going on to the next fight. If it's on climate change, there are so many arguments that we've had in the party. We win some, we lose some, we move on. If you want to call out the party, join a faction. Factional groups are there to do that and hold the party publicly, but I'd argue that affiliated bodies aren't.
Interesting. The spiciness around Labour students starts. Ella, so Young Labour shouldn't be a factional voice. It should be a internal voice to the party, lobbying for young people. What do you think?
I think that's fair, and I also think whilst everything should be on the table, because Eli's right that everything affects young people, no one else is going to lobby for us, right? If young people need specific policies on rent or the issues that come in mental health services between 18 and 19, issues like that Young Labour are the people even to lobby on that. You look at regional conferences, for example. Now, I was a member of Eastern Labour Exec, and I was a member of East Labour for a very long time, and they always did policies and issues that specifically affected the East. It's the same with the local CLP. And, you know, I have never particularly think, whilst they should have policy and should be able to debate these things, it's they're there for their local area. And it's not like young people can't go and stand as delegates, and maybe there should be, every CLP should have a reserved youth space, the same way we should be doing gender balance and issues like that. That's, I think, a different debate. But Young Labour is the place for young issues to be given centre stage and for us to move those debates forward. So I do think, yeah, we should be giving a special precedence, especially when we're putting forward motion. I can't say we anymore, I'm too old, especially when Young Labour is putting forward motions to party conferences. They should be on youth issues. Of course they are, because it's the young people to say we are advancing the issues that we care about that are going to affect us. I don't think that Young Labour can sit back and expect CLPs to say, you know, renting for youth is particular, whatever the issue might be at that time. Just to come back on something Eli said, which I thought was really interesting about bottom-up change, I think that obviously really important, but the structures of the Labour Party and the changes that need to happen, be that through, you know, something I worked on at the Jewish Labour Movement was changing the Labour Party rulebook to ensure that discrimination, racism, any harassment under the Equalities Act essentially was a specific named offence. That had to be done through the party, through party conference, and it's really difficult to do that sort of thing. We do need to bring the Labour Party with us on these sorts of things, because there needs to be resource, there needs to be oversight, there needs to be structure, and those things, you can't just present the Labour Party a constitution and say, accept this, because it's also their potential reputational damage, their potential liabilities, the branding, all of the sort of legal stuff that comes with it, I think the Labour Party needs to have a very serious conversation about, okay, how are our structures going to work, and how are we not just going to turn around and say, oh, we don't like some of the Labour students, by then. That's really, really bad. We can't have that happen again. So how do we make sure we create a structure that is non-factional, long-lasting, and legally and politically sensible?
It's a very interesting challenge to all of us, I think. Danny, I'm going to give you 45 seconds to come back on anything you wish, and then we'll do 30 seconds round to each to everybody before then going on to question 2. So, Danny, 45 seconds.
Yeah, all it is, I would just say, just bear in mind that actually what the youth actually gets from the party is very little in terms of its voice being heard. The Labour Party has a hard time listening to groups from liberation groups, yet let alone the youth wing. So assuming that you can just basically work through the system and we'll get somewhere is by the side of the matter. But I also think that there's an issue with how the Labour Party probably views young members, much like how society views young members. Often basically the society and the Labour Party looks at young members as naive, as something to be paternalised, and to be sort of to be mothered almost. I think we need to break. I think you need to break that. In terms of representation that's mentioned, you've got some European youth wings that have managed to leverage their voice in the party and power in their parties to get a section of their CLP delegates have to be young members, which I think is really, really good, really brilliant. We haven't got anything like that. We get token youth officers. So I think assuming that, and also when you think about campaign groups, sorry, a little bit longer, I think about campaign groups, they don't just basically keep quietly and try and do things behind back doors. What they do is they have to make a bit of noise to be able to basically make their concerns heard, generate support, and then they'll get the changes they want. But you can't just assume that the young members are going to be listened to if they act respectable and nice all the time.
Be loud, yes. 30 seconds each you get. So on the stopwatches, we've got Eloise on 6 minutes and 34, Abdi's on 5 minutes 52, Ella's on 7 minutes 14, and Danny Filer's on 6 minutes and 54. So rounded off, Eli, 30 seconds to just summarise on question 1.
Yeah, so just to summarise the purpose, clearly we have so many young members in our party. Like we do have the capacity to do lots of things, and I've been really encouraged how even prior to the dissolution of Labour students, Welsh Labour students, Scottish Labour students, London Labour students, we managed to organise ourselves without any support, without any funding. So it's really incredible what we can do, like even without support. Now just imagine how amazing and how wide-reaching we could be if we just had a little bit of cash, a little bit of support, one more staff member to help us out sometimes. That's all I have to say.
We're good. Abdi, a little bit longer to balance out your time.
Sorry, sure. I just pick up on Danny's point because I actually agree with it about, of course, that sometimes you're going to have to speak out, but you build up political capital if you turn into what the Young Labour Twitter account is, and you basically fire out any idea that comes into your mind and any criticism or anything, then of course everyone's just going to sideline you and just consider you as irrelevant. So you build up political capital, but sometimes I completely agree that sometimes you do call them out. I think we've established quite well what the point of a youth section of the party is. For me, it's a campaigning body. It's empowering young people to lead as young people in their communities, to make change, to influence change, to train themselves, and to affect change within the party structures. And I think that is the point for me that I think the Labour Party's youth sections should be aiming to have.
And Ella?
I think given all of our criticisms as people who love the Labour Party and have been involved, it's any wonder why anyone would want to get involved at this point. But I think Abdi has a really strong point. Youth sections are about creating people, not just leaders, but about moulding and shaping and helping people develop and grow into who they are, and to channel their passions and their ideas into something bigger than themselves, by the strength of our common endeavour and all that. I think it's about creating community, it's about creating solidarity and having accessible open spaces where people can discover their politics, change their politics, and really shape the future leaders and the current leaders that they are.
Great. And Danny, 45 seconds you've got.
Yeah, so the youth sections are there to be the voice for young members and for student members. That is their purpose. At the moment, and history is very clear that there comes an issue when students and young members tend to basically make their voices more heard, and often if it happens to be at the clash of the party. I think the history is there, the conflicts are there. You can see where the flashpoints have been throughout the street, where basically what led to basically like you said, the Labour League of Youth being cancelled twice, and then obviously the Young Labour Socialist Youth being cancelled, and obviously the Knowles being cancelled twice. I think we know where the issues are. We know that there's issues with control of the party. There's a balance between basically the amount of control and amount of support that you have between the youth wings. And at the moment, we're probably a little bit too close to the party having overall control over the youth wings, and it will generate conflict, and that conflict. No, you say
There you go.
Oh, one.
No,
yeah, and we should try to, at all costs, try and limit that conflict where possible. Yeah.
Great. That's question one. What's the point? Why? That's the question. I'm sure the debate will keep going, both on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube after we post the video. The second question we come to is how. How? I'll read the question, which each panelist has had in advance. Across the world, socialist and social democratic parties organise their youth sections in a wide variety of ways. Many have higher upper age limits. Some have a junior and young sections. Some have state or additional party funding. The variables are many, within realistic boundaries, budgets, size, etc. And from the starting point of what currently exists as Labour's youth sections, take that to be what you wish. How would you reform Labour's youth sections? We opened in one order, and so we're going to go in reverse order for people to do their remarks on this. So, Danny, you have 2.5 minutes.
Cool. So one of the really illuminating things for me was when I first started getting involved in the Young European Socialists, and I started talking to and interacting with people from other countries and finding out exactly how their youth wings are organised. And honestly, it was sort of almost like an epiphany, because you realise that actually the settlement that we currently have, the youth sections currently have within the Labour Party, is incredibly poor. The funding is very poor. The actual autonomy and ability to speak out is actually quite poor. And it's so one of the ones that is lauded as one of the best ones is the youth in Austria. Their funding, the models are different because they get party funding, and therefore their youth sections also get funding. To give you an example, I was told that their youth section in Vienna was able to employ 3 full-time staff in just Vienna, and they also happen to own or have access to multiple properties across the thingy. That allows them to be doing weekly meetings with little cost. That allows them to run campaigns. Whereas you look at our situation in the UK, there's about 100,000 members currently, young members, and if they're all paying £2.20 each, that's about 220,000 possibly that the young members bring in. But Young Labour receives none of it. They have 1 full-time staff, but that full-time staff actually gets seconded to do other party stuff. During the election, we know that was the case. So we don't have the situation where you get 1 full-time staff that is devoted just to youth organising. So I think what should be seen is one. Also, for instance, the Labour students was sort of partially defunded, and its 3 full-time offers were removed.
30 seconds.
But we didn't actually see a transfer at all into other youth sections. So actually, that money had just gone somewhere else. So actually, even asking for that didn't actually help. The youth sections literally got to fight for money that's already still allocated to youth organising. What we should be seeing is basically a better funding model. I think there should be a funding formula whereby, say, 1 month's worth of young members' membership dues goes into the coffers for Young Labour. There's probably needs to be better organisation in terms of the way in which the student and the youth section operates, because they've all typically been quite separated, but actually would probably benefit from much more interaction. Same with the trade union section, youth sections. And in terms of age, I think there's an argument to be made for splitting off the under 18s for on the grounds of safeguarding. But I would be worried about basically reducing the youth section too small. To give an example, one of the things that was done in like sort of the 80s, I think it was.
Time.
Go on, that's fine.
Ella, 2.5 minutes, go.
I think following on from Danny's important point about fundraising and funding, it's clear the Labour Party spent its money on ridiculous things in the past couple of years, be that NDAs, which was campaigning against having around the country for its staff, spending God knows how many hundreds of thousands on lawyers against the Equalities Human Rights Commission. The Labour Party has not exactly spent its money well recently. And I think that is, very much included in spending on youth and how we do that. And, there are loads of different models to look at. One of them could potentially be similar to how councillors have a stipend or a small amount of money given to them in order to be able to do their jobs. It shouldn't be that you have to give up huge amounts of your own personal funds, should you have those funds, by the way. Not a lot of young people do not have a huge amount of spare income to spend touring the country, either campaigning or just like visiting different clubs and having those experiences. So there needs to be A, some sort of bursary system, and B, some sort of payment for the people in senior positions who can give time. So they take a job for 4 days a week or 3 days a week, and the Labour Party should be supporting them. What people have all said about the youth officer is really important, and having people focused clearly on things like general elections. Everyone should be seconded to help win a Labour government, but could they be doing youth organising? There are very clear ways in which this can work. I think the loss of Labour student staff is a really sad thing, especially if you look within the National Union of Students and the amount of work the Labour students has done within that over the past God knows how many years. I think the point that's already been made about safeguarding is really important, making sure that young people are safe and happy within the environment, so be that not doing events at pubs or like having some sort of structure within to work. But I also think what's interesting is the higher end of the spectrum as well. You look at issues like the minimum wage, you look at issues like rent. We do need to be supporting our young people in sort of the early 20s post-university in order in that stage of development as well. Young labour groups, for someone who moves to a new city for work, young labour groups might be their lifeline in terms of being able to make new friends and have those experiences. So I think that's really important. I think accessibility and inclusivity going forward and creating a space that is not just secure over the years and maybe written into party governance and structures, but really has very strong rules on safeguarding, on bullying, on racism and intolerance that makes people want to get involved. I think, as I said earlier, you look at some things that people have talked about in the panels for the past few years, happened in the past few years. Why on earth would people want to be involved at this point? It's been messy and it's been painful and it's been abusive at times. So we need to create things people want to join, want to be a part of. And I think that's a job for the whole party, not just for the young people. Great,
and that is time. Abdi, you have a lot longer if you want it.
Oh, well, I'll try to use it efficiently. I'd start with the safeguarding issue, because I really think the safeguarding issue is something that's brewing behind the scenes that is going to tip over at some point and is really going to engulf the party. I really feel uncomfortable with under 19s in events where the Labour Party, we all know the Labour Party events are always held in pubs. I mean, it's like it's a holy site for us, isn't it? So I think and I would argue that actually probably not making the age limit for people to turn 18, but actually separating the under 18, so 14 to 18, setting up a new organisation called Labour Youth that could be focused on training, etc., but making sure that it's cut off from the upper, the over 18s. And I think the upper limit, we can look at that. I think it's 26 currently, which is a bit of an odd age to stop at. So I'd argue stopping it at 30. Some European parties obviously have the 35 limit. And I'd argue that. I'd argue looking at how the Young Fabians, because we haven't talked about the Young Fabians, talking about the sections of the Labour Party who are in the youth, looking at how the Young Fabians can play a part of being a part of the youth sections in the party, so what support they can give, but also looking at the model that they have, because obviously the Young Fabians, similar to the Labour Party, is an affiliate, is a membership body, and some of the money is ring-fenced for Young Fabians activities. I was a former exec member. I have no idea how the funding works, so Adam can touch on that at some point. Looking at how we can work with trade unions better. GMB Young Members, for example, have a really good model. They're a campaigning body. They've been able to run really successful campaigns. I'd also want to see the party looking at apprentices, and if there can be a specific membership for apprentices and getting them to join the party. And I think the biggest thing that the party needs to do for the youth section is training. Groups like the LGA Labour Group, for example, already do good training across the party. They do it off their own back. I'd like to see Young Labour approaching LGA Labour to get them to train more young people to run for council, to be councillors, to make decisions in their local areas. I'd really like to see that. I'd really like to see LGBT Labour, BAME Labour, other disability Labour, the Labour Women's Network being able to do more training for Young Labour as well, to really help young members who identify into those different caucuses really understand intersectionality and the importance of liberation and equality within the party. And funding, the stickler for everything that the Labour Party does. I completely agree with Ella's point. The party really hasn't spent its money well over the last couple of years. What was it? Labour Live is a really good example of that, where we thought, let's reach out to young people, so we'll host their festival with artists that no one's ever heard of, and surprisingly no one turned up. There are ways of doing it, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we can't have a festival, but let's get at least some artists that young people have heard of.
30 seconds.
So there could be a way of making the Labour Party more fun, and all of these things can be looked at. But the first thing that we need to get right is safeguarding. And the one thing that I really want to see the party do is make sure the disciplinary actions for young members is absolutely clear. Some of the abuse that people get on Twitter is absolutely vile, especially BAME women within our ranks. Just to name a few, Rania Ramli, Miriam Mo, Chair of Young Labour and Chair of Labour Students, some of the vile abuse that they get in their comment, just look at one tweet that they've sent. Some of the vile racist abuse that they get is unacceptable. And it's BAME women in our party who get the most abuse, but all of us have had our fair share, but it's BAME women specifically had their fair share, and I would like to see the party get tough on that and really crack down on that, and making it clear that there's no space for any abuse.
Brilliant. Thank you, Abdi. And Eli, you have up to 3 minutes and a bit, should you wish to have it.
Cool. First, on Labour Live, I was one of the target people for this event, and it was in the middle of my A levels. That's the kind of stuff that the Labour Party was on. They did not think about that. But anyways, so I'd like to point out that I've never sat on a national committee for like Labour students or Young Labour, anything like that. But as the sole student on this panel, I'm going to focus a little bit more on Labour students. The fact that we cannot return to the previous model we used for Labour students, it's not going to happen. So as I mentioned previously, I think this is a really good opportunity to start from scratch, build something even better, and we need to build the collective power of students and staff and promote good socialist politics. And one constant argument that I hear is that OMOV is expensive, and I mean, I've never organised an OMOV thing. I don't know how much it costs. I can't verify those costs. But I personally think that democracy is worth it. I think it's worth every penny, and I think it's much preferable to disenfranchisement, having the same arguments every single year. I can't be the only one. I know I'm not the only one who thinks that the culture in Knowles prior to its dissolution was unsustainable and caused just so much stress to everyone. It wasn't worth defending, and the majority of Labour clubs, we just didn't want to play the game anymore. We were over it. And I really liked Danny's point on our sister wings in Europe. I think that this is something that the future international officer for Young Labour could step up on and really help us with this. Going to our sister parties, asking how they do things, what works for them, what doesn't. We shouldn't be afraid to ask questions and seek answers. Like, no more British exceptionalism. Come on, we can ask for help. It's okay. So fact of the matter is that Labour students, university Labour clubs are organising themselves right now as we speak. Loads of clubs, loads of really smart young people are looking at the Labour Party constitution, how social societies work, and they're looking for a way to build back Labour students. We want to decide our future on our terms, and as long as the party delays on listening to us, they're losing out on harbouring the energy and spirit, I guess, that we would more than happily provide given the right platform to do so.
With time to spare, Speaker, I'm going to loop around again and give Danny a chance to come back and maybe finish his point, but also build on anything which he feels has been said.
Yeah, unfortunately, off what Eli was just saying, unfortunately, the Labour Party hasn't got a very good history of taking much notice of self-organised youth wings trying to come forward and become part of the Labour Party. It's tended to basically take the other route, which is in which it will ignore the self-organised group and decide to form its own on its own terms. That's an issue, obviously. I think there's also, and so I mean, I'm really glad to hear that the student clubs around the country are actually banding together and working together, because especially with the way that NEC changes, you need to show that there is a student voice there is an alternative, and it's really, really important that we get back on track with having students organised in the party. Other points, I've kind of just blanked a little bit. Can you come back to me in a minute?
And Abdi, so I'm going to go Abdi, then back to Ella. Abdi, on Labour students, you know, it's I mean, my club disaffiliated more than 5 years ago, and you know, there have been calls for reform for as long as I can remember. It's obviously worth defending, but what would you want to see student wing look like moving forward?
Yeah, well, I'd argue that of course, any organisation needs reform after a long time. But if you look at Labour students, it has always been the losing faction that has asked for reform. So by doing that, you lose you lose any goodwill, because people just think you're doing it for political reason. What we need is a cross-factional approach to it. So if you're going to build a student wing within the party, do it across. So it's really good to hear that from Eli, that student Labour clubs are already doing that they're looking at alternative models and how they function with the party. What I say to you is try to get the broadest part of support across the party, across the whole party, different ideas. I think then that's a really good, solid way of presenting to the party. We've got a unified voice, a unified approach to this. This isn't, you know, momentum against the right, it's not the left against the right. It's just young people and students who want to, you know, make sure that students are organising the best way. The best thing the party can do is obviously, you know, the party needs to set out where its structures are, so people can work towards that as well. Since the party got rid of the 3 full-time officers, there's been, you know, no kind of alternative to that. The 3 officers obviously helped with Young Labour stuff and organising events for them, so obviously that support and that funding has gone. So the party really needs to get its head around what they think a youth structure will look like. And I think young people within the party need to go back to them and say, this is what we want to look like, and trying to draw something up together that can work.
Unity is strength, as they say. Ella, I'm going to ping back to you, then go to Eli. You spent lots of time in student sections, and do you think it's possible to bring lots of different voices together to present some kind of unified idea as to what Labour students should look like, and any ideas of how it should be structured?
Yeah, of course it's possible to bring people together. I think for the past 5 years or so, we've been so focused on fighting ourselves rather than fighting, you know, the Tories or, you know, other political parties, that we've been really damaging to ourselves, to our own mental healths, and to each other. I think coming back to sort of what I said earlier about that pathway for that 14-year-old who wants to get involved in the party, they need to be able to look at the party in the next few years and say, this is what's going to happen in the next 10 years. These are things I can do. This is what I can access, and this is what I can be a part of. You know, the fact that last time we had the NEC Youth Space and the Chair of Young Labour elected, the fact that they were happening on different voting systems because unions thought they could have old men decide who youth representatives should be, that's not okay. It needs to be youth-led, and if we're going to do this, we need to do it properly and fairly. And so people can look and not see contradictions in terms, not see different things they just really don't understand. The party is complex because it's grown organically, because it has socialist societies and it has sections and it has all of those different things which make the Labour Party so wonderfully unique. But that's not clear, and it's not accessible, and it's not inclusive to so many people. Of course, we should have all of our socialist societies. We should make sure that we understand they should all have youth officers. Obviously, you can't dictate to socialist societies what they do, but can we suggest they all have youth officers? Can we bring all of these together? I know there's been a number of youth reviews in the past, God knows how many years. What's happened? Where's the publication? How can we see that? How can we engage with that? And how can we take it forwards? I think young people have a real champion in Angela Rayner particularly. I think we can use her going, well, I can't say we anymore. I think young people going forwards can really count on Angela to make sure that some of these things do come through and are fair, and that goalposts don't consistently change according to faction. And that
I'm
some
going to
things
call you there, Ella.
how
That's
the
all
Labour
right.
Party work just need to be set in stone and change because of time rather than because of people wanting to, and particularly, you know, people who aren't accountable to members or aren't young.
Great, perfect. Eli, rebuttal. Labour students, do you think it would be possible to bring together I don't know, a council of all the different Labour clubs from across the country?
Yeah, so from what I understand, this new wave of incoming chairs, I'm an outgoing chair, so I'm not involved, but my incoming chair has reliably informed me that it's basically just a massive group chat. Whoever wants to get involved gets involved, and they had a Zoom call recently and it went on for 3 hours. That's insane. Like, that is the level of dedication we're talking about. So I am really hopeful that the fact that the group of people behind it, they are extremely dedicated, very smart. I believe they'll come up with a great solution to the troubles that have been plaguing Labour students since the dawn of time. I have a lot of faith in the people who are coming next, like my own little fresher babies. Like, they're going to do good. I trust them. Yeah.
Great. And we are past 7. So I am at this point going to move to closing remarks, and we'll do them in the order we started. And as I say, there's no poll as to who wins this. This is an open forum debate. And should anyone who's watching wish to get involved in it, email us at info@youngfabians.org.uk so that we can hear your voice and you can put your voice forward. The times we've got are: Eli is on 10 minutes and 39 seconds. Abdi is on 12 minutes and 1 second. Ella is on 12 minutes and 37 seconds. And Danny's on 11 and 45. So nearly tried. So Eli, 3 minutes or 4 minutes if you want it to close us off. Why should Labour Youth sections exist, and what should they look like? Yeah.
So I don't think my closing statement's going to be too big. I didn't write anything because I assumed we would go over time, not gonna lie. I think this conversation, this little debate today, I think it's been really good. It shows that we do have a lot of like similar values, and it shows that obviously we all want what's best for the youth section. We want to see more young MPs, we want to see more young councillors, and it's clear that as long as Labour's youth wings continue to be underfunded and a mess, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, and this is why we're going to continue to have a stale male pale bureaucracy. So I really think that going forward, it's evident that, you know, it's going to be democracy. I think that's going to be at the centre of everything we do, and that makes me really happy because I have to deal with Young Labour for so many more years. So thank you guys, I appreciate it.
Yes, we wish you the best of luck. Abdi.
I won't be long, I promise. I think going on from what Eli just said, I think we all kind of agree that the party has underfunded the youth sections for too long, and that needs to change, and we need to empower more young people. I think the party needs to get to grips with how the youth section behaves. At the end of the day, it's a party brand, and the party brand should be used in a way that is in accordance with the party's procedures and the party's policies. I think the party needs to get tough on On discipline, I think we need to, I'm not saying we should all wear the same clothes, obviously, but what I'm saying is the party needs to absolutely make sure that there is no space for abuse and no space for vile language. We can disagree, and I hope we disagree on things, but we could do it respectfully, and that the party, and that we have that sense, that the camaraderie sense of, agreeing to disagree within the party, which I think is really important. I want 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds who've grown up on a council estate to be able to come and join the party in order to change their lives, in order to change the lives of their families and their local communities. The Labour Party is there to inspire people and to enhance them and to give them a voice, and the party needs to be doing that much better. And I want those 15, 14, whatever-year-olds to join and be able to make that change. So hopefully we can do that with more funding and more unity.
More funding, more unity. Sounds great. Ella, closing remarks.
As I was listening to everyone, it reminded me of one of my favourite Jewish proverbs. So time for some pre-Shabbat wisdom for everyone. It's from Pirkei Avot, The Ethics of Our Fathers, and it's a quote from Rabbi Tarfon. And it says, "It is not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it." I think that's actually probably quite a wise phrase for the work that needs to happen in Labour youth sections. We are not going to finish this work, but we also cannot neglect in building the future. I think that's actually very nice for me going into the Sabbath as well. But look, there are huge issues with Labour youth sections. I think it's also very interesting to look across the divide as well. And Young Conservatives have had huge issues with bullying and harassment within their ranks. So it's certainly not just me that has refused to sit on a Young Labour platform because of other people on it denying the oppression that I have faced. So that's maybe nice that it's not just us that are terrible people. But as a serious point, like, all of the arguments that have been raised are really valid. There's issues on safeguarding, there's issues on what we are here for, and it is to change the world, and it is to develop the world we want to see, and to empower young people to feel like they have a voice and they're not just patronised as the leaders of tomorrow, but the leaders of today who can make those changes and build, be it the Labour students they wish to see, or be it Abdi's young person on a council estate who has that, needs to be told from the Labour Party that yes, there's a space for you and there's a voice for you and we want to listen to you. I think what I'd want to see out of young sections or Young Labour or whatever it's going to be in the next few years is properly resourced, properly managed organisation that is professional, that is slick, that can get campaigners on streets, but also that can create policy that young people care about and that's going to materially impact and change the lives of young people in this country. You know, our generation, I don't even know if we're all in the same generation, but let's assume we are. Our generation is going to be so financially, economically, jobs disadvantaged, climate disadvantaged. We are facing so many challenges, and yet we are squabbling about what systems we're using and how it's working. Something just needs to be done. Someone just needs to take charge and say, okay, I'm going to lead a review into this. I'm going to have the chair of the British Youth Council chair this review and see how this comes out and see that we can create something that works for everyone. Clearly, the way the Labour Party works, it's not going to move anytime soon, given the amount of governance, and there's not even a conference this year to change some of these things in. But I don't think any of us can desist from that work.
I'm sure Amanda, the chair of the British Youth Council, will be delighted to hear you've recommended her for a review. Yeah. Very, very striking. I think the climate emergency and so many things which are going to impact us as a broad generation are not going to impact baby boomers or most of the average MPs. They're going to impact us, our lives, and etc. etc. Danny, see us out.
Yeah, so when it comes to the Labour Youth Wing, I think that unless we basically pay heed to history and the issues that we've had time and time again, we'll be doomed to repeat them. It's really clear that at the moment that the Labour Party has not quite grasped that, and it's pretty much operated on the same basis for the last 100 years in terms of how it handles its youth section. If we want more young people to be voting Labour, if we want more young people to be taking an interest in our policies and having a say, then we have to make sure that they're given a voice and their voices are heard. If we want them, the way that the party should work should be, it should have essentially an arm's length approach to the youth wing. It should be give the youth wing support when it wants it and when it needs it, but it should basically not be taking the approach that the youth are to be managed, to be paternalised, to be sort of looked after. The young people, there's like Eli said, there's lots of young people, very, very enthusiastic within our youth sections, and often they will tune out of the Labour politics because they become bored. They're not listening to their campaigns that aren't reflective of what interests them. I think we have to work on a little bit of trust here. We have to basically trust that our young members are going to be able to organise themselves and be responsible, and be able to make their own minds up. What I'd like to see in terms of funding is I'd like to see us create some sort of funding model whereby some of young members' contributions actually goes into their organisation, and not just allowing a young Labour to have a bank account and for it to raise his own funds. What I'd like to see is I'd love to see young members to take some cues from some of our youth wings in Europe on political education. We might not want to talk about every type of various socialist philosopher, but I think there's a real benefit to British socialist history and Labour history that we don't really get to teach much. I also really think that we should be. I'm gonna be even outside of the Young Fabians youth section come 6 months. But I still think it'd be important for me to support the young members when they want to basically leverage and their voice. That includes basically making sure they have a greater number of delegates in CLPs. If we want young members to basically have a stake in CLPs, give them a stake in CLPs. Make sure that a representative percentage of CLP delegates has to be young. If there's 15% of young members in the party, 15% of CLP delegates should be young. Yeah, I think basically young members will take you up if you give them the tools and the opportunity and the freedom to basically innovate on policy, innovate on campaign techniques. If we don't, we basically just risk repeating the past, unfortunately, is my opinion.
Very good, very good. And I don't think I need to necessarily summarise, but improved safeguarding, making sure an NEC youth seat is for youth members to decide. There should be a debate around the age of Young Labour or youth sections, and should there be a youth and a Young Labour so that under 19s can have their own voice. Reforming CLP as CLP allocations to conference, a better funding model, neutral political education and training for young members to ensure we're really building the membership we want for the future. All of these debates and all of these points will no doubt keep going, but I want everyone to be part of the debate. So if you do have ideas, please do email us at info@youngfabians.org.uk and write for us. The best thing that's going to come out of this is more conversations about how we can create a better, more accessible youth section that has more influence over our mother party, so that we can have a good voice for young people on the issues they care about. I'd like to thank everybody who came on the panel, Danny, Eli, Abdi, Ella. This, I think, is just yet another bit of proof that we can all work together and we can sit down and we have debates and we can discuss things without shouting at each other and without it descending into abuse. And I look forward to more of these debates as we move forward. So I'll bid you all a good evening and thank you all for joining us. Thank you.
Right.
Cheers.